Been through a lot of shit, but I know it could be way worse, bro.
Yeah.
And I probably feel like that because I don't necessarily feel like I've been through a lot of shit. Like a lot of bad shit happened, you know what I'm saying? A lot of good shit ain't happened, you know what I mean, that I could kind of shed light on. I understand why they did that.
Yeah.
They did that to box us in and put us as a group.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Nobody ever called themselves no fucking Grundy, bro.
35-year-old Eric Butler was found shot in a car and later died at the hospital. Before his death, Butler had been in the news since 2015 when he and 10 others were charged as part of the notorious Grundy gang led by convicted drug kingpin Richard Grundy.
Last time we were here, we told you about a man who rapped about hardly breathing and died exactly the way he described. We told you about the gold necklace that said must obey bosses forever. We told you about the first shooting in April and the second one 60 days later that finished what the first one started. We told you about Richard Grundy, the Phoenix pipeline, and a debt that nobody in official channels will confirm, but that people in Indianapolis have been whispering about since the night Eric Butler died. And then something happened that we didn't expect. So tonight we're going back in, deeper, because part one was the surface. This is what's underneath it. Before we get into it, if you watch part one and it hit you the way it hit the people who left those comments, subscribe to 3AM Files right now and click that bell, because this is exactly what this channel exists for. Not to recycle headlines, to go where the headlines won't. The people speaking in those comments are taking a risk by saying anything at all. The least you can do is be here to hear it. Now let's go. When part one dropped, 3 categories of comments came in that stopped us cold. The first was about money, specifically the size of the debt that Eric Butler allegedly owed. One commenter put the number at $200,000. Another said no, it was $750,000, and a third said the debt had nothing to do with it at all. That Eric Butler wasn't killed because of what he owed. He was killed because of what he was. Competition. Now, before we go any further, I want to be completely clear with you. These are community-level accounts. They are unverified. Law enforcement has not confirmed any of these figures or any motive publicly. But here's why they matter anyway. When people who are close to the situation, people inside the world this case exists in, can't agree on a number, it doesn't mean they're all wrong. It usually means the debt was large enough and the structure around it compartmentalized enough that different people only knew different pieces of it. That's how these organizations work. Nobody outside the very top knows the full picture. So the fact that the numbers don't match isn't a weakness in these accounts. It's actually evidence that the truth runs deeper than any single person is willing to say out loud. Let's sit with the debt angle first, because the gap between $200,000 and $750,000 is not a small thing. That's not a discrepancy in someone's memory. That's a different category of obligation entirely. $200,000 in the drug distribution world is a serious debt, the kind that gets someone warned, threatened, shot at, and left breathing as a message. $750,000 is a different conversation altogether. That's the kind of number that doesn't come with warnings. That's the kind of number where the people you owe it to have already made a business decision before the first shot was ever fired. They didn't shoot him in April because they wanted to scare him. They shot him in April because the first person they sent wasn't accurate enough. That's the coldest interpretation of those 2 shootings being 0.3 miles apart and 60 days apart. And it's the one that the numbers from the community actually support. Now think about where a number that large comes from. Eric Butler was a high-ranking member of the Grundy organization, not a street-level dealer, a shot caller. When Richard Grundy went to federal prison for life, the supply chain that ran from Indianapolis to Phoenix didn't just shut down. Organizations like that don't dissolve when the top falls. They fracture. Different people absorb different pieces of the operation. And the debts, the money owed to the Phoenix suppliers for product that had already been fronted, those debts don't get forgiven because the kingpin got locked up. They get inherited by whoever is still standing, by whoever the suppliers still expect to collect from. And if Eric Butler was managing a piece of that operation after Grundy went down, he wasn't just a rapper with a complicated past. He was an account holder in a financial system that runs on violence as its enforcement mechanism. Here's what makes the $750,000 figure particularly significant if it's accurate, And again, we're treating this as unverified community information. A debt that size, in a network connected to cartel-adjacent distribution, is not the kind of thing you resolve with conversation or a payment plan. The people who are owed that kind of money are not operating on good faith. They are operating on examples. And making an example of someone who owes $750,000 and has spent years evading law enforcement, beating federal cases, and walking out of courtrooms free, that sends a message that goes far beyond Eric Butler. It tells everyone else in the network exactly what happens when the money doesn't come. But then there's the third comment, the one that reframes everything. The person who said this wasn't about debt at all. That Eric Butler was killed because he was competition. And here's where the psychology of this case gets genuinely complicated. Because both things can be true at the same time. In street-level criminal economies, the line between owing someone money and being someone's competition is often the same line. When the structure above you collapses and you start operating independently, you aren't just a debtor who hasn't paid. You become a rival. You're using the same territory, the same customers, potentially the same supply relationships, but now you're keeping the money instead of sending it up the chain. That's not just a financial problem for the people above you. That's an existential threat to their control of the market. Think about the 2023 raid. Eric Butler was found in a crack house on East Washington Street, right in the heart of the same East Side corridor where the Grundy organization had always operated. He had a confidential informant buying crack cocaine from him. He was wearing a necklace that said "must obey bosses forever." But here's the thing about that necklace that nobody has asked out loud. Who were the bosses he was obeying in 2023? 5 years after Grundy went to prison. If the original bosses were gone and he was still running product on that same ground, was he obeying a new structure, or had he become his own structure? Because those two things look almost identical from the outside, but they mean completely different things to the people whose territory he was operating on. A jury acquitted him in February 2025. He walked out of court free, and 14 months later, someone shot him for the first time. Then 60 days after that, someone shot him for the last time. The timeline between his acquittal and his death is almost exactly as long as it would take for someone above him to realize that the legal system wasn't going to handle what they felt needed to be handled, and to decide to handle it themselves. The Indianapolis community is not using the word coincidence. They are using the word crisis. And they are not wrong, because here's what you have to understand about what's happening in Indianapolis right now. This is not a city where violence against artists is new, but the concentration of it. 2 high-profile musicians, same side of the city, same window of time, both cases ice cold. That's not background noise anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns in criminal ecosystems don't happen without a reason. Either the same network is responsible for both, or the conditions that created both deaths are so embedded in the East Side's criminal landscape that they're producing the same outcome over and over again regardless of who the target is. What makes Eric Butler's case specifically different from Playboy the Great's is the federal escalation. After Butler's death, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, stepped in and announced a $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Now $5,000 is not a large number in the context of a murder investigation, but the ATF's involvement itself is a signal. The ATF does not typically insert itself into local homicides unless there is a federal dimension to the case: organized crime, interstate trafficking, illegal firearms connected to a larger network. The fact that the ATF's own press release identified Eric Butler explicitly as a member of the Grundy gang tells you exactly how they are framing this investigation. They are not treating this as a street dispute. They are treating this as a continuation of a criminal organization's internal enforcement activity. And that framing matters more than a reward amount, because it means that somewhere inside the federal investigation of what remains of the Grundy network, Eric Butler's name was already on a list before he died. Investigators already knew who he was, what he was connected to, and what kind of world he was still operating in. The question is whether that knowledge was enough to protect him. And clearly, it wasn't. The system that failed to convict him in court also failed to warn him in time. Or maybe he already knew. Maybe the warnings had already been delivered in April on East Washington Street at an auto repair shop. in the form of bullets that left him stable but not safe. There is one more thing the community accounts point to that we need to address directly, and it's the thing that connects the debt theory and the competition theory into a single coherent picture. When an organization the size of the Grundy crew fractures, it doesn't fracture cleanly. Different factions emerge. Different people claim different territories. And the people who were supplying the whole operation from Phoenix, the people whose money ran through all of it, they don't pick a side in those internal disputes. They just want their money from whoever is holding it. So Eric Butler could have owed a debt to the suppliers. He could have been seen as competition by a rival faction that wanted his territory. And both of those things could have made him a target at the same time, for different reasons, coming from different directions. That's the kind of pressure that makes a man stay on the same block where someone already tried to kill him, not because he's reckless, because there's nowhere to run where the problem doesn't follow him. His studio engineer, Drew, said he was a legend in the city. People close to him say he had record deals on the table. He was still making music. He was still building something in the only space where Eric Butler got to be something other than what the streets and the courtroom said he was. And now that space is gone too. 2 shootings, both unsolved. A federal reward that nobody has claimed. Community accounts that put a debt somewhere between $200,000 and $750,000. A rival faction that may have seen him as competition rather than a debtor. A city that has lost 2 of its most significant rap voices in 45 days. And a code of silence so thick that the ATF is offering cash for information and still getting nothing. So I want to ask you something directly tonight. If the debt theory is right, if someone in Indianapolis or Phoenix or somewhere along that supply chain made a business decision that Eric Butler had to go, do you think that person is sleeping fine right now? Do you think the silence protect them forever? And if the competition angle is the real story, if this was about territory and control, and who gets to run the east side after Grundy went away, then who exactly is running it now? Because somebody is. And the 2 open murder cases in Indianapolis right now suggest that whoever it is, they're not done making decisions. Drop your theory in the comments. Tell me what you think the real number was. Tell me whether you think this was about debt, competition, or something we haven't uncovered yet. And if you have information about either Eric Butler's murder or the murder of Cornell Davis, Playboy the Great. The ATF tip line is 1-888-ATF-TIPS. The IMPD detective on the Butler case is Christina Friel at 317-327-3475. These cases are open. Someone knows something. And at 3 a.m., when the world goes quiet, the truth has nowhere left to hide. Subscribe to 3 a.m. Files, share this video, and come back, because we're not done with Indianapolis yet.